Well, for more on China's aging population, the potential demographic squeeze, and its impact on the economy, I spoke with Nicholas Eberstadt. He's the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy for the American Enterpirse Institute. And I asked him what economic priorities the elderly are facing.
Well, of course, it's a varied picture, as varied as the regional geography of China itself. And the circumstances for seniors in Shanghai and in some of the rural areas of the West are radically different. Purchasing power is very different, and the needs for support are very different as well. In much of China, we see the emergence of a senior population that's going to be relatively poor, especially in rural areas. And that's going to raise great questions about social programs, about the safety net of health and pension, and also about living arrangements with children and others who may be supporting elder people.
So in terms of spending on social programs and other sort of infrastructure to help support an aging population, how can China's economy afford it, and how are they preparing themselves?
One of the ways that China can afford it is because of the extraordinarily high savings rates that the Chinese economy and the Chinese population has evinced over the past decade and more. The savings don't match up perfectly with personal need, of course, but high levels of personal savings are part of the overall formula. With regard to social programs or the social infrastructure, Chinese government has been preparing for gray China for over 2 decades.
So as we look at the growth trajectory for gray China, how would you say that stacks up? Because there are some concerns that China's population is going to grow old before it gets rich. How valid are those concerns?
Depends where you live in China. If you live in affluent Shanghai, Shanghai's already gotten pretty rich. If you live in the rural hinterlands, the aphorism of getting gray before you get affluent, I think may be a little bit painfully true. So within China, there are going to be many different profiles. And some places, I think, are going to have considerable humanitarian need, whereas other places, I think, we're going to see senior citizens fairly well provided for. It's a number of different storylines in one big country.
Now, on top of those different storylines, you obviously have changes when it comes to the impact of culture, whether children are choosing to live away from home. You're also having, obviously, the lifting of the one-child policy. How is all that playing into what's happening with the gray economy?
The social insurance program, the pension program, and health program for older people in China was called the family. And as you just indicated, there's an ongoing revolution in the family in China. The rise of the one-child family, I think, puts a perfect illustration of this. The notion of having 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child, indicates the ways in which family structure may be stretched very thin in providing support for the emerging senior population of 2030 and 2040. It's not for no reason at all that the Chinese government has just made laws that criminalize neglect of one's parents, financial neglect of one's parents, and even inattentiveness in spending insufficient time with one's parents.
Now, let's also look at the consumption potential for the elderly population. How do you see that progressing, and how are perhaps some of these companies cashing in on what they're seeing in terms of consumption trends?
If we make a virtue of necessity, we can say that the consumption needs of China's current and impending future senior population may help in the transition to a consumption-based economy rather than an export-based, savings-led, investment-driven economy. And there's there are some opportunities there, but obviously, and some of them I think will be quite promising. The crucial question, I think, will be the mismatch between the consumption needs of much of the senior population and the savings ability of that same population. We're going to see the big savers are in mega cities, and I don't think we can count on rural households with the elderly to be real consumption drivers. So making adjustments for the mismatch there, I think is going to be very important for consumption growth in China's senior population in the years ahead.